Good morning, Mr. McEwan and Ms. Graham.
Thank you. Yesterday I was asking some questions about the Gold Group and discussions that were had, and I wonder if we can begin today by going back and looking at some other aspects of that, if I may.
Okay.
Could we look at the second Gold Group minute meetings, which are PS 07268. So this was the Gold Group meeting at 14:40 hours. So the first one had been at 11:30 on the 3rd of May, and this one was at 2:40. And I think when we looked at it yesterday, we said this was the first one that Perk attended.
That's correct.
Could we turn to page 2, please? And if we start with item 3, the investigative process. And so Detective Superintendent Campbell's name is there with Detective Chief Superintendent Bowe.
Yes.
And we heard that Campbell was the SIO and in
correct.
charge of the investigation. And he's obviously addressed the Gold Group in relation to the investigative process, and he's outlined that and raised various aspects and drawn them to the attention of the group. And the first bullet point there relates to loci strategies. So it says there are 5 locations. So 5 locations that the police are interested in terms of the investigation. And they were Hayfield Road, where the events took place, Colette Bell's address, Victoria Hospital, where we understood Mr. Bio had been taken after the events, Martin Dick, his address. We've heard evidence from Martin Dick, and we have a statement from his partner, Kirsty MacLeod.
Okay.
And then the home address of Mr. Zaid Sahid. And we've heard evidence about the occupants and his family
Okay.
being present in the house when the police arrived. Can you help us understand at that stage, when Campbell was giving an outline about these 5 locations being secured, can you explain to us what your expectation was at that stage that would be done with the properties? Can I ask you first about Colette Bell's address? Do you remember anything about that?
I don't actually remember much of the conversation, to be honest with you, years ago. I could give you a sort of resume of what my expectation would be, if that's helpful, but
Yes,
you may have
absolutely.
heard that from others. I mean, Colette Bell's address in Arran Crescent was one of the last places, as I understand it, that Sheku was at. So as part of a police investigation at these early stages, I think I mentioned it yesterday, you need to widen the net as broad as possible so that you don't miss any forensic and or any other evidence that might be there. And then once you've established a greater amount of facts, you can then begin to downsize and focus your resources and your investigative strategies into particular areas.
And in terms of the strategy in relation to the property, or all the properties, was that under the direction of Pat Campbell?
Yes, as part of the investigation, yeah.
In relation to the address of Martin Dick, do you remember, or do you have any view on what expectations you had in relation to that address?
No, I don't have enough detail or recollection.
We've heard evidence that Mr. Bio had attended at the address of Martin Dick. There'd been no physical altercation or anything of that sort at that address. No suggestion that there had been some sort of disturbance. Martin Dick wasn't present at Hayfield Road, and there was no suggestion that he was. Was anything said or discussed with Campbell about why that had been selected or why that had been identified?
Not that I recall. I would assume that Martin Dick had been in contact with Sheku before the events in Hayfield Road. So it's about, again, just that, you know, until the police know the facts, it's better and more careful to broaden your investigative strategy as wide as it possibly can, the net as wide as it possibly can, and then you can bring it in as you learn greater facts. The minute you lose control of a loci, then any forensic capture or any other evidence could be lost forever. Whereas if the police have control of it, then, you know, by default, when they understand the circumstances, you can then retrieve what might be in there of evidential value.
And finally, with regard to the home of the family of Zaid Saheed, again, do you remember any part of that discussion, or again, were your expectations different in relation to that property?
No,
or the
very,
same?
very similar, I would think.
Right. And where it says 5 locations being secured, what was your understanding of what was going to be done in relation to those locations?
I don't think at that point it was probably clear as to exactly what was going to get done. It was about taking possession of them until the true circumstances were fully understood.
Right. And for those people listening who maybe want an explanation, what does it mean to take possession of a property?
So there's a number of ways you can do it. You can have police officers or police staff present at certain addresses. You could, on other occasions, you know, secure properties by means of metal shutters to save police officers or police staff being deployed there. I suspect here, I don't know for certain, I suspect here, because of, you know, we're in the first 12 hours of inquiry, it will have been police officers or police staff that were present at these different locations.
So was it your expectation that under the direction of Superintendent Campbell, the SIO, that police officers would be deployed to these different addresses
Or
to
police staff, yeah.
take police staff to
Yeah.
take possession?
Yes.
And if we've heard evidence such as locust protection measures were put in place, is that the type of thing you
Yeah.
would have expected?
Yeah, exactly that.
And can you explain to us on what was your understanding about the basis upon which that possession or that's, you know, the properties would be secured?
So at that point, they were potential scenes where there may be evidence. So, you know, police had made themselves present there, and I assume engaged with the householders and, you know, explained the importance and the need for that. This is where, you know, we go back, or I go back to, you know, family and explanation, and, you know, these things are important because there's a lot of questions that would come from why are police there, and if we're in a position to explain that in an honest and open way with the family or whoever else is concerned, then it just makes life a little bit easier for everybody.
And so when you're talking about what you would expect, what would you expect the officers who arrive at these properties to take possession of them, what information would you expect them to be furnished with?
I mean, every scenario is different, but the sort of basics of the investigation, we believe that this address may have some relevance to the investigation that's ongoing. We may not know exactly the relevance at this point, but it's important that we have a police presence to see if, you know, we can gain control of these properties until we know the importance of or otherwise of them, at which point they could then be, you know, relinquished back to the occupants.
Would part of that explanation involve explaining to the occupants that someone had died in circumstances that were at that moment unexplained?
Yeah, timing's important because, you know, you would not want to be disclosing really sensitive information to householders without ensuring that the family and other next of kin were briefed and aware of. I'd hate to think that certain people would be getting more information than family. So you have to be really careful about that.
And so in the situation we have here, we've heard evidence that a death message was delivered to Colette Bell in the morning when she was in Kirkcaldy. But it wasn't until after 3 o'clock in the afternoon that the first death message had been delivered to the next of kin and the Johnsons. So in that situation where someone has died at 9, shortly after 9 in the morning, and the partner has been given a death message but the next of kin has not, can you help us understand what you would expect officers to be able to share with occupants if those properties were being seized round about lunchtime, 1 o'clock, 1:30, that type of thing?
It's difficult for me to give any firm answers because I wasn't involved in this part of the investigation, so it's really difficult, and I would just be, providing hypotheticals, which I'm not convinced would add much value.
Right. And what can you give us an example of what you mean when you say a hypothetical? It's just so that the chair can sort of understand what type of information people would be what officers would be expected to share.
So for me, it would, if we're attending at a home address of Martin Dick, for example, we would explain. I would expect it would explain to Martin why we're here, and but that's maybe a more general term because the chronology around whether family etc. what they had been told at that time. But you would certainly require to give Martin an explanation as to why you're there and why you're having a presence and want to take possession of his home address.
And what would be the purpose of giving that explanation to one of the occupants?
It's courtesy, decency. It's about about working with the householder in a reasonable, professional fashion to make sure that because that whoever's in that house needs to go somewhere else, and we need to try and help them achieve that. So we need to work with them. So it's better to do it in a sort of really consensual way, in a professional way than any other way.
We've heard other officers talk about consent and obtaining to consent. Does that give police the legal authority effectively to secure and seize a property?
Yeah, it's consent. So there's mutual agreement that the police are requiring to have a presence there because there's an ongoing incident and there may be something of evidential value in that house at that point.
Was it your expectation in relation to these properties that consent would be obtained from the occupants?
Again, I don't know the detail with this, but there has been occasions in my police career where consent has not been given. That's not uncommon, to be honest with you.
Was this discussed at the Gold Group?
No,
meeting?
the Gold Group is a very high-level strategic group, but it lasts probably 30 minutes. It's extremely high level. I don't remember, but I would imagine Pat Campbell would come in and say, currently under the loci strategy, we have taken possession of 5 addresses, here they are, and we have police officers there, full stop, move on to the next bullet point. That's the level of the discussion at Gold. There are other meetings that there'd be more detailed discussion, but not at Gold.
And you've talked about situations in your career where consent has not been forthcoming. So what do the police do in that situation if they wish to secure a property? So
if there's specific intelligence and or witness statements or evidence to the effect that there might be, hypothetically stolen property or drugs or whatever in that house, then, we would require to go and get a warrant from a court, in effect, signed by a sheriff to give us authority to go in and search that property.
And is something that police commonly do?
Yeah.
We've heard evidence from a fiscal who was involved at one stage, who talked about a phone call is made to the on-duty or on-call fiscal. They will then discuss the application for a warrant and decide whether to put it before a sheriff who's also on duty, and then obtain the paperwork, and that warrant would give the authority for the police to seize the property or items within. Is that the type of situation that you're talking about?
Yes.
And do police, is it a policy or an approach where they try and get consent, but if they can't get consent they then go for a warrant, or do they go for the warrant first? Or?
To go for a warrant, you have to stipulate on the warrant predominantly what it is you're going there for, what purpose. So, you know, that, again, you know, I'm really delving into parts of this inquiry that I have limited knowledge on, but, you know, at that early stage, I'm not sure that level of information in detail would be known.
So they may not have been in a position to secure a warrant because they couldn't have all the details?
Perhaps not, yeah.
So very much dependent on consent being given?
Yes.
We've heard evidence that if consent's being obtained from an occupant, that a full explanation is given. It's explained that the purpose of securing the property. It's explained that they can withdraw consent at any time. They're free to not consent. And one officer who's given evidence, a DC Finch, said he would often note that down in his notebook and then get it signed by the occupant. Is that the sort of approach that you would agree with in terms of?
Yeah, I think that's good practice to do that, and it's not uncommon. Certainly, that's what I have personally done previously, but many other officers will have done the same.
Thank you. And in terms of, we're talking about securing a property, but has what you've just explained apply equally if you're asking occupants to leave a property and remove themselves from a property?
I would have to read up on guidance on that area, to be honest with you. I'm not exactly sure.
Is there anything you're aware of which would mean you don't need consent or a warrant to require people to leave their homes?
I mean, we do have common law powers, but I'm so because I've been retired for a period of time. I'm not. That's not at the forefront of my mind, to be honest.
No, that's absolutely fine. And we've heard one or two pieces of evidence where people said in an emergency situation, if someone who you think's got drugs runs into a house and you need to go in.
That's absolutely correct.
I mean, I don't think that's the situation that we're talking about here.
No.
So ultimately, the strategy is determined by the SIO in relation to the properties, and the mechanism whereby people are asked to leave their property and to allow the police to secure it or perhaps carry out searches, that would be largely either through consent or by obtaining a warrant. And that decisions about that would be ultimately the responsibility of the SIO.
Or his deputy. I mean, the SIO's, as you can see just from even these bullets, has got a broad range of issues to concern himself with, so he may have appointed a deputy to look at the loci strategy. I don't recall if he did or not, but I'm sure he explained all that.
Thank you. Can I ask you to look at another bullet point here? It says discussion re PM. I think we've heard that that's likely to be post-mortem.
Yeah.
Is likely to be carried out tomorrow afternoon. That would be the 4th of May, so that would be the Monday. CSM to be deployed for each loci. Is that crime scene manager?
Yes.
And then formal identification of deceased required. Can I ask you about this bullet point? Do you remember that discussion about the post-mortem?
Not specifically, not 8 years on. I'm not surprised at what's written in that bullet point, you know, so.
So this would be part of the investigative
Yeah.
process, one of the elements that would be considered by Campbell.
Yes.
And if crime scene managers were to be deployed for each loci, would that have an impact on the responsibility for obtaining consent or obtaining warrants or any of that?
Not necessarily. You can deploy a crime scene manager to a house if you have the full consent from the occupant. Yeah.
It would appear, this is the minutes, as I say, of 2:40 in the afternoon. It seems to be saying that the locations are being secured, but a crime scene manager is to be deployed for each loci. Do you have any recollection of whether that was something that was planned to appoint a CSM, but hadn't been done in advance of the loci being identified?
That would be the normal, and as part of an investigation of this importance, you know, you would be beginning to think, right, where would the crime scene managers require to be deployed? Because crime scene manager is a very specialist resource, and there will be a cadre somewhere in Police Scotland, but there will not be a huge number of experienced crime scene managers. So, you know, for Pat Campbell or his deputy to be thinking around those lines, I think is appropriate. But yeah, I don't think they've been deployed at that point by the reading of that.
Thank you. Can we move on to item 5, which is on page 3? And this is family concerns. It appears to have been spoken to by Detective Inspector Robson. And it says, discussion re next of kin strategy, identified as sister of deceased. Colette Bell, girlfriend of deceased, is currently within Kirkcaldy Police Station and has been informed a deceased person is in hospital and that it may be her partner. Was it still D.I. Robson that was in charge of the arrangements with Colette Bell at that time?
From the wording of that, he's certainly the one that's given the update. So I don't recall, but I would assume so.
So can we assume that at the very least he had the most up-to-date information of anyone at that meeting?
Yeah.
And can I ask you to turn on to the final page, which is item 12? Any other business? Independent advisory group to speak to CS McEwan re cultural issues. Do you remember this aspect of the meeting?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So this was 2015, probably around 2008. I was the head of the CID for Fife Constabulary. So what we had in place at that point was an independent advisory group, and that group was made up from minority community representatives, are probably described, as well as other people from or with protected characteristics. And I would chair that meeting, and we would invite as broad a range of minority communities and those with protected characteristics in on a bi-monthly basis. And when I first chaired that meeting, it was a very positive meeting, and but it didn't for me achieve all of what I was hoping for it to achieve. So as the months went by, I developed a little bit further to not just be a general opportunity to chat, network, but actually to have more focused discussions about certain things that were going on in Fife that I could learn from the experiences that would be presented across that room by those with lived experience from minority communities, as well as LGBT, disabled, etc., etc.
Were there black people in the independent advisory group?
Yes.
And what did you learn from your involvement with them?
Loads, huge amount. So what we did was, or what I did as the chair, was, as I say, develop it further in that I began, so, you know, we would have hate crimes reported across Fife, or hate incidents. And, you know, how do we as an organisation, how did we as a police force learn from how we police those certain incidents? And, you know, we could speak on a sort of hypothetical basis about it, but what I asked the group's view on is whether we could actually bring real life hate crimes that had been reported in the previous 2 months and bring the police officer that investigated that into the group and to give a formal presentation of, you know, not dissimilar in that, you know, at 5 o'clock on a Friday night, I got a call to go to a takeaway shop in Burnt Island. I arrived there. This is what I was faced with. The occupants of the shop were from a minority background. They may have been, you know, Pakistani, Asian, it doesn't matter. Here is what I was faced with. Here was how I investigated that. What is the learning from that? So the police officer, and I used to caveat it right at the beginning to say, be as open and honest as you possibly can. There is nothing in this room that you cannot disclose to these people. And the officers would do that and do it very well, and then we would have a discussion around how could we as a police force have investigated that better. But there would also be things around, you know, and it's a long, long time ago, but, you know, things, maybe some of the witnesses didn't interact well with the police. Why was that? You know, and I would seek the views around the table around, you know, why is it that you think they didn't interact well with us? Was it our approach? Did we approach it in a certain way that was against their beliefs? You know, where's the learning from that? So that's what we built in. So that was probably about 2008, and it continued for quite a period of time. And it got to the stage that we would adjust our, you know, equality and diversity policies to reflect some of the feedback that I got from this really important group.
In terms of the learning that came out of that group, as well as adjusting policies, how did you disseminate that to officers who were attending the takeaway or shop?
So we did, yeah, absolutely. So the officer that was there, you know, he or she or both at times, they would be present present during the feedback session, because, you know, they need to listen and learn as well. It's not just me and maybe another couple of police officers that were there, but we also had I had in charge of an equality and diversity unit, which was a small unit, 3 or 4 members of staff, maybe 3, and then they would be present at this forum every second month, and any of the feedback or the learning, then they could or would cascade it across the force if it was something that was really quite or very pertinent and important, as well as adjust the policies. It was about, you know, trying to mainstream whatever the feedback was.
So was this group meeting, was it twice a month or every second month?
Yeah, it's always every second month.
Every second month, thank you. And this sounds very interesting. Is there anyone in particular? We're investigating all matters, and sometimes witnesses mention things that might give rise to some interesting lines of further inquiry. Is there anyone in particular you can recall that we might be able to speak to and take a witness statement from?
As in police officers, or?
I'm thinking about members of the group.
No, I can't. I mean, Adnan was one of my main contacts, but he's sadly passed away now, as I understand it. But we could, I'm sure we could find that out. You know,
Thank you.
Not me personally, because I'm out of touch now and retired. But I'm sure through the equalities unit, as it was in Fife Constabulary, there will be a list of, you know, there was a wide range of members that would come, so there will be a list there.
Thank you.
Somewhere.
Thank you very much. Excellent. I'd like to move on from these minutes, please, and then look at the minutes of the third Gold Group meeting. And these are PS 03139. You'll see these on the screen.
Yep.
These are from minutes from a meeting at 20:15 hours on the 3rd of May 2015. Now I think you've still got the blue folder in front of you,
Yes.
don't you? I'd like to ask you some questions about these minutes, but I see from your operational statement that you have said on page 3 of that statement, at paragraph 4, that you attended a Gold Group meeting at 1950 hours. Now, am I right in assuming that that would be the same meeting that these minutes relate to?
Yeah.
It
that's-
wasn't that there was two separate meetings at
No,
different times?
It's always a typo, I think.
Right. So that's just, we can assume that this was the next and the third Gold Group meeting that day. So this is after you've met with the family. We spoke about that
Yep.
yesterday afternoon.
Yep.
Right. Can we look at first of all, look at your operational statement, PS 03136. And that's page 3, please, paragraph 4. And it says, at 1950 hours, the same date, I attended the Gold Group meeting at Kirkcaldy Police Station. Present at that time was ACC Nicholson and members of staff from the PERC. I updated the group and requested that PERC attend that evening to help provide some answers to the family. I was informed by the lead investigator that he had no staff available to attend the house, but that he would telephone the family. I thereafter finished duty. So when you say you informed the lead investigator, do you remember who that was?
Yeah, that was Keith Harrower.
And he told you that he had no staff available to attend the house. And was that the house of the Johnsons?
Yes.
What was your response to that?
I certainly was not impressed by that. You know, the family deserved a meeting, a briefing that evening.
Did you voice those concerns at that meeting?
It was either at the meeting or after the meeting.
And if it was after the meeting, who would that have been to? Or was it the same group?
Maybe I genuinely don't remember. I remember having the conversation with Keith directly. I couldn't tell you who was all there at that point.
So you raised it with Keith Harrower?
Yeah, I may have been more professional, not more professional, that sounds unprofessional, but less direct at the Gold meeting, because that's a very formal setting. But then Keith and I did have a conversation off table, but I couldn't tell you exactly who was there.
Right. And when you say off table, does that mean not being minuted as a formal part of the Gold Group?
The meeting was finished, and yeah, it was just a discussion that we needed to have.
Did you raise any of those concerns with ACC Nicholson at any stage?
About PERC saying that they never had the staff.
They didn't have any staff. You talked yesterday about having concerns, and
Yeah.
we see that you've said there in your statement they had no staff available.
Yeah. I'm not sure after the meeting did I go back to ACC Nicholson or not. To be honest, I don't recall.
Is there any mechanism where concerns about the lack of resources, for example, that are available can be raised with the Crown? Where your concerns could be raised? How could that be done?
Not that I wasn't aware of any process in place for me to raise concerns around the PERC resourcing levels.
Did anyone at the Gold Group meeting pick up on this and raise the possibility of maybe another organisation coming in to support PERC? You've mentioned yesterday that obviously the Crown wanted it to be independent. They've appointed PERC to carry out an independent review. And you acknowledge that you could understand why they didn't want the police investigating
Absolutely.
themselves.
Yeah.
But did anybody in the Gold Group suggest any other organisations that may be able to assist?
Not that I recall, no.
Or any organisation that might be able to provide additional resources?
No, I don't.
I'll tell you what I'm interested in. We've not heard any evidence about this yet, but it's something that we're investigating at the moment, about the possibility of the Health and Safety Executive becoming involved. And it would appear at this stage, and as I say, we've not heard from any witnesses yet from the HSE, and we've not heard from the Crown or PERC yet.
Right.
But there might be protocols in place, or there may have been in 2015, between the Crown, the HSE, Police Scotland, maybe involving PERC, relating to investigations into work-related deaths. And there may be a specific protocol regarding investigations into deaths, serious injuries of police officers at work or members of the public following contact with the police. And I'm just interested in knowing whether at that time you had any awareness of that, or the possibility of HSE coming in, helping support an investigation, or on occasions leading an investigation.
So, for this specific scenario or incident, I don't recall. I had used or been involved in an investigation with Health and Safety Executive before, probably again when I was head of the CID in 2009. I can't even genuinely tell you exactly what the circumstances were, but they led on the death, supported by some of my staff. So it has, or that scenario did take place, but it was, I don't recall any specific conversation during this incident around bringing the Health and Safety Executive in.
So the experience you had did involve HSE, but that was prior to PERC coming into existence.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And none of that was discussed or raised at the Gold Group meeting?
Not that I recall, no.
Did, out with the Gold Group meetings, did anyone from PERC or the ACC or anyone else raise with you that as a possibility?
No,
HSE might get involved?
Not that I recall.
And you don't remember much about your experience in 2009? You said there was a death.
Yeah, there was a death. It was definitely not following police contact, but it was a death. I want to say on a boat, but because we had responsibility for the fourth bit, I can't remember.
Right. Well, thank you. If we could we go back to the minutes, please? PS 03139. And if we can look at item 2. This is a factual update. This has been given by the SIO Campbell. And you'll see a number of matters are raised here. I'm interested in this second paragraph. Information to suggest that the deceased had an argument with his partner, Colette Bell. And we've heard from Colette Bell that she was asked about an argument, which she denied there'd been any argument. Do you remember this being raised at this meeting?
No, it clearly has been briefed out, but I don't recall it being of particular significance.
Can you help us understand why at the Gold Group meeting was this being minuted? Why would it be considered significant?
It depends on whoever minuted the minute You know, to be honest, you'd have to ask him or her around that. It's a lot of minutes are very much down to interpretation. So people and police officers, I don't know if it was a police officer that was taking the minute, traditionally are not minute takers, and they're not professional in that. They're not professional. They're not really experienced in taking minutes. So I don't know. You'd have to ask him or her.
Presumably this is information that Campbell, who is an experienced SIO, has considered sufficiently important to raise at the meeting. Can you understand why an argument, I mean, Mr. Byle has passed away by this stage, why would that be of significance to the investigation and the facts involved in that?
I don't know when that argument took place. Was it in the morning, the night before? I'm not sure, but it's a precursor to, or it's a lead up, or is it? I don't know, but is it a lead up to the events that took place on Hayfield Road?
Just to be clear, the evidence that Colette Bell gave was that there had been no argument.
Right.
But she was asked about an argument, and if I understand her concerns correctly from her evidence, she viewed it as an attempt to find reasons to blame Mr. Byle in some way, and to raise concerns about his relationship with his family.
I can't comment on that.
Can we look please at, sorry. Can we look at item 3 please, investigative process. Again, this is spoken to by Campbell, and we see again that the 5 locations are mentioned here, so as being secured. Presumably work was ongoing in relation to that. Was there any other?
What minute is this? Is this the 8:15 one?
Yes, this is the 2015 hours on the 3rd of May, so it's in the evening. It's after you've spoken to the family.
Okay.
Was there any more discussion about the properties at that meeting?
I don't recall.
And then if we can look at the bottom of the page at item 5, family concerns. So this is after your meeting with the Johnsons, and it says, Chief Superintendent McEwan discussed brother-in-law of deceased. He is part of an independent advisory group and had advised the initial attending officers that he knew Mr. McEwan and requested that he attend and speak with him within 24 hours. Is that the independent advisory group we were just talking about a moment ago?
Yes.
And do you remember that Addie Johnson, Mr. Byle's brother-in-law, had been a member of that group?
To be honest with you, at the time I didn't remember that, but later, I think probably when I spoke to the family, Addie probably reminded me of that, but I didn't know prior to that.
So after, when you're attending this Gold Group meeting at 8:15 in the evening, had you made the connection by then through that Addie reminding you? Yeah,
and to be honest, vaguely. I mean, I didn't want to insult the family when that was raised. I mean, the group, the membership changed quite frequently, and it was a big group, so I didn't specifically, maybe because I was focused on other things, but I didn't specifically recognise Addie from that group at the time.
But once you met him and he reminded you, did it spark your memory?
Yes, to a degree. Yeah.
To a degree. And then it says, Chief Super and Chief Inspector Shepherd attended at the home address of the next of kin, highly charged environment, deceased's partner Colette and extended family within. Family concerned that early contact they had was purposely vague. They were unhappy they had not been told anything about who contacted the police and ambulance. Chief Superintendent provided them with an understanding of events. We discussed this yesterday in some detail. Chief Superintendent discussed the role of the PERC and reassured them it would not be P Division officers investigating the incident. Can you explain to me what is a P division officer?
So that's the Fife division officers. So yeah, the police officers that sort of try and keep the communities of Fife safe on a daily basis.
So is that the area of Fife?
Yes.
Now, we've heard evidence that a number of officers, for resourcing issues and business continuity, I think was the phrase you used,
Yeah.
they're being brought into Kirkcaldy because a number of officers have been taken off duty.
Yeah.
They're in the canteen because they've been involved in the incident. And part of your role is to try and plug that gap, I think you
That's
said.
correct, yeah.
To make sure that all the other work that is continuing to go on is not left without people in position to do it. But I'm interested in some evidence that we've heard that officers who were brought in to help with the investigation were actually from other areas in Fife. Were you aware of that?
I don't recall exactly just now. I'd be surprised if any of the officers that were brought in were involved in investigating the incident. So there's two different strands to this. You have the community side of things, the locust protection, and then you have a set of investigators. And the investigators, unless you're going to tell me differently, my understanding were from the major investigation team, which are not P division officers. They're a national resource that came under the command of Pat Campbell that came in to investigate the incident.
So your understanding is the investigators who were looking into the events
Yeah.
were separate from P-Division completely?
Yeah, they were the major investigation team, and they are not part of my P division staffing numbers in my resource.
So people like Robson and Dursley, they weren't part of the investigation at that stage?
At 8:20, no, I mean the Park were leading on the investigation at that stage.
Right. Thank you. And can I see the task at the end? Family crave reassurance and are asking about witnesses, etc. They did not wish anything publicised until they informed deceased mother who is in London. Can you tell us a little about the task? Do you remember about that?
I do actually. The family, the wider family, the mum and the wider family were elsewhere in the country and elsewhere in the world, and they were really keen for nothing to go out that would prevent the family passing on the tragic news to the mum.
So you were aware that the mother was in London?
Yes, yeah, certainly that way down south, yeah, London, yeah.
Were you given any additional information about her plans to travel to Kirkcaldy or anything along those lines?
Yeah, there was. I'm not sure if she was in transit by that point, but if she wasn't in transit, she was certainly. It was imminent, but I can't recall exactly if she was en route or if she was leaving the following day. I'm unclear.
And was the purpose of her coming to Kirkcaldy made clear to you?
Don't know if it was made clear, but I naturally assumed it was, for the family to be together during this, terrible set of circumstances.
And knowing that, you've obviously raised it at the Gold Group meeting.
Yeah.
And it says task. What's the meaning of that? A task that mentions the mother being in London?
So I'm assuming media were present at that. I don't see the names at the top. Was media on that list?
Sorry, let's go back to the top so you can see who's present. So Kate at media.
Yeah, so
is mentioned.
media were there. So it was really about
If we
any
go back down.
media messaging going out beyond this time that would in any way alert Sheku's mum and other family members that that he had passed away or died following police contact.
So was that a task not for you, but for Kate?
Yeah, so the task's probably not best articulated there, but that it was, for me, it was around, you know, the media messaging. We had to be extremely sensitive around that for the reasons that I've described. We don't want to be, you know, putting his name in the media, you know, until the family are fully sighted on what's happened.
Right. And then can we turn on to the next page, page 3, just at the top? It says, discussed that police did not know next of kin whilst Colette, partner of deceased, was at police station. I'm interested in that because that seems to contradict a previous entry. We've talked about Colette Bell had given details of the next of kin when she was in Kirkcaldy Police Office. And this is obviously the minutes from 8:15 at night.
Yeah.
Can you remember where that arose from? Who said that? Or?
I genuinely can. I assume I've probably been, you know, saying, you know, we need the family, you know, Caddy and the wider family are really, you know, upset that they have not been properly notified. And it may, I am jumping because I don't know, I can't recall the conversation. It might have been somebody came in and said that we did not know who the next of kin were at that point. You know, at the point earlier in the day, but that's my only sort of reading of that one sentence.
I mean, by this time, the police did know the next of kin,
Well,
and you'd actually attended.
Well, I'd attended, so this is like a sort of historical discussion around, you know, earlier. That's my reading of it. Earlier in the day, the police did not know the next of kin.
Right. And then it says, Chief Super discusses initial decision to have Police Scotland's flows, but now hand over to Perk flows for arrangement to gain entry to house of deceased, recollecting belongings for child, discussion re-initial contact on phone from Perk. Were you aware that requests had been made to allow Colette Bell to get some possessions from the house at Arran Crescent? While obviously it had been secured by the police.
Yeah, it was at the meeting I had with the family, Colette or maybe Colette's mum or maybe both, you know, were needing to get into the house to get clothing as well as, I think it was powdered milk and important things like that for the child.
And was that something that you expected someone to pick up and
Absolutely,
follow
yeah.
through? Who would that have been the responsibility of?
So for me, it's the Perk there leading on the investigation. So arrangements need to be made to get whatever it is out of that house to the family.
Thank you. And then the next paragraph is Chief Super discusses family, and the word there used is desperate to know about PM, post-mortem, and also arrangements on having them conveyed to mortuary in Edinburgh. So it would appear that they understood there would be a post-mortem, and they wanted to know about arrangements having them conveyed, taken to the mortuary in Edinburgh. And is that something you were aware of from your visit with the Johnsons?
So, I mean, that was part of the discussion at the visit, was around, you know, next steps and, you know, post-mortems and such like, and the family were clearly, you know, desperate for information around the process that was going to follow. My commitment to them at the time was that, you know, I didn't know the answers to that. That wasn't my role, but I would raise it as I did then at the Gold meeting with Perk and others there to say this is what the family need to know.
And that was minuted
Yes.
at that meeting. And then it says task to address all family issues raised. Whose task was that?
Well, it would be helpful if it was saying who the task was given to, but, you know, for me it's who's in charge of the investigation needs to not maybe personally deal with these things, but needs to initiate them and make sure that they're completed.
And so it would have been Perk that would have followed through with these items from the minutes.
Yes.
And then can I ask you briefly about item 10, media strategy, communications plan. I think Kate, the media person, has spoken to this. There's been media interest. A media statement prepared was rejected by the Crown. A brief release condolences to the family was put out. Refer any media interest to PERC. Can you tell us a little bit more about this media statement that was prepared, who it was prepared by?
No, I did have sight of or added some value to a media statement on the day, but rightly, that's absolutely correct, that PERC are leading an investigation, they're reporting to Crown, so it is, they have responsibility, and they can determine what goes out into the media.
From your perspective, you told us about your role that day. Would you have preferred for Police Scotland to issue a media statement?
I think they do need to be coordinated. I think it would be wrong for one organisation to be putting certain messages out that contradict or the other organisations have not had sight of. So, PERC are in charge of this investigation. I do think it's right that they have control of and oversight of what's getting released into the media, is to ensure that it's accurate.
Can I ask you to look at the final page? So this follows on from 12, any other business. I'd like to look at some of the items there. And it says a definitive resolution is required, re-contact with family and reassurance to them. And Chief Superintendent McEwan not adverse to going back to house, if required, to assist with retrieving items for the baby of Colette Bell, but telephone contact to be made by PERC re the family and arrangements, etc., for conveying to mortuary. And so it appeared that the PERC were going to make telephone contact with the Johnsons about arrangements for conveying to the mortuary, and that would be for the post-mortem.
Yeah.
And that you had said you weren't adverse to going back to assist with retrieving items for the baby. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and it probably comes across as probably part of my frustration. At that meeting, I have said, look, I'll go and do it. I will go and get, if we need to get this stuff, I'll go and personally go and get it. Let's just go and get it for the family.
Were you were frustrated at that time?
We just needed to make these things happen.
I think you told us yesterday about your priority in relation to the family.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you a question about something? We've not heard from Keith Harrower yet, so we've not heard his evidence. We hope to be able to take that next, another hearing, a future hearing. But we have a PERC statement from him. For those in the room, it's 00007. I won't ask for it to be put up on the screen at this stage. He indicated that during a meeting with you, you indicated that Mr. Bio's family had articulated significant concerns over information disclosed to them by representatives of Police Scotland. And additionally, it became apparent that Police Scotland flows had not been deployed as previously intended, and that Chief Superintendent McEwan and others considered it inappropriate to do so. Now, I appreciate I'm just reading out that section, but do you remember a conversation with Keith Harrower giving him the impression that you considered it inappropriate for Police Scotland flows to be deployed?
Yes, I do actually. I think, and I'm trying to think of the timing of it. After the 4:45 or the 5:45 meeting with Graham Dursley, it was clearly apparent that the trust and confidence in police at that point with the family, because of the death messages and the delays, etc., was not where it needed to be. And my view was, whatever arrangements had been considered before that, we need to get perk flows into that family, because, we need that independence that I talked about yesterday. To even suggest putting Police Scotland flows in at that point, I don't think personally will have added any value. That then came to fruition and was clearly apparent when I met with the family, because they had a real upset and distrust towards Police Scotland at that point. So for me, that's what an additional reason why we needed to get, or why Keith needed to get, perk flows into that family at that point.
Can I ask you one other thing, which is, we understand was happening round about this time. So prior to the Gold Group meeting at 2015, but after your visit to the family.
Yep.
So in that sort of period.
Yep.
We have an inquiry statement from a Gary Wilson, and he's a community lay advisor with Police Scotland. And he was contacted by a Chief Inspector Jill Bolton. Do you remember Jill Bolton?
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about Jill Bolton?
So Jill Bolton, I don't know what rank she was at that time, maybe a Chief Inspector, I don't exactly recall, but she was in a national division called Safer Communities, and part of the roles and responsibilities of Safer Communities was to work with minorities, communities across Scotland, and to revise policies and procedures. So Jill attended at Kirkcaldy Police Station that afternoon at some point, I don't remember exactly when, but in advance of me going to see the family, the ACC, who I think I mentioned yesterday, part of his remit was to be in charge, I think, of Safer Communities. He asked me and Nicola Shepherd to get a briefing from Jill around diversity issues, just to make sure that we would not be going into that family environment and by any way sort of insulting them by any actions or behaviours that we adopted. So we had and that was part of or quite a significant part of the delay of me not going up to the house until whatever time it was.
10 past 6.
10 past 6 was because, I'm not sure Jill was there at that point or she travelled in, but I was just waiting. Nicola and I were waiting for her to arrive to get the briefing for me then, or for us then, to go up to the house.
So I think yesterday you talked about preparation with you and Nicola Shepherd. Was this part of the preparation?
Yes.
Right. And the statement we have from Gary Wilson suggests that Jill Bolton phoned him at 18:55 hours, 5 to 7 in the evening, and talked about the potential need for an independent lay advisor to be identified for deployment. And I think this particular witness, Mr. Wilson, he has protected characteristics himself in relation to LGBT. He had indicated to her that he didn't think he was the most appropriate person to provide that input and advice as a lay advisor. And he understood that she agreed with that suggestion, and he didn't get involved further. I'm interested, did anyone else get involved in the role of a community lay advisor to assist you or to assist the investigation in any way?
So I did on that day, pretty sure it was that day or the Monday, but I'm pretty sure it was that day. I did phone the chap I mentioned earlier, Adnan, who, had done a lot of work with Free Fife and the Fife Arabic Society, and I phoned him and had a discussion with him. Where it became sensitive was that Adnan knew the family really well, and he was not comfortable in becoming that sort of, not spokesman, but that my go-to person, because he knew the family really well, which I absolutely respected, and Adnan was a real gentleman. But what we agreed was that should he, so community trust, community reassurance is about, I spoke yesterday around disorder, but it's also about vulnerability and how, communities can feel vulnerable at times like this. Because of what's happened, minority communities can feel really vulnerable and threatened and insecure, absolutely understandably so. So Adnan and I agreed that should he get any sense of that across Fife, he would pick up the phone and we would have a discussion around it. And that conversation didn't need to happen, thankfully, because these issues did not really boil to the surface at that early time.
Thank you. So apart from your discussions with Adnan, was there anyone else appointed as a lay advisor at that time?
No, and then we convened, we kicked off the community reassurance group, which that was the purpose of that, was then, that was a group. I've used the sort of the lay advisors before, again, when, I was in charge of a murder and it was a transgender was the victim of that. For me to truly lead that investigation and understand the implications and the thoughts and the feelings of that community, I really needed to speak to an advisor that could help me with that, so that's what I did. So the purpose then of the reassurance group had a similar premise to try and, have a true understanding and appreciation, but also it's not just about one set of, it's not just the black community here, it's other minority communities as well that may be affected or disaffected by the scenario that was playing out.
Can I ask that we move on to minutes from, or an agenda from the 4th of May. So this is the day after, on the Monday. And they're from 12:30 that day, and it's PS 03161. And this was a further Gold Group meeting. So as I say, at 12:30 the day after. And you'll see these on the screen. If we look at the bottom of that page, just above the number 3, does it say there, families seem to have disengaged with police? Sorry, I should have perhaps said at the top of that page, sorry. There's no note of who was actually present at that meeting. Do you remember if you were present at that meeting?
I'm pretty sure I was there, yep.
Do you remember who else was there?
No, but I would imagine there'd be a lot of the similar, well, obviously Pat Campbell's there because he's given the factual update, as is DI Stuart Wilson, he was part of the major investigation team. It may well be if you go down you might see some of the names that are as per the key
We
updates,
can do that as we go through it.
Yeah.
So any names that are mentioned will definitely have been there.
Yes, and I would imagine, media would likely have been there.
Were Perk there?
I don't recall, and I don't think so, but I'm not 100% sure.
When you say you don't think so, do you remember why they wouldn't have been there?
No, I don't know why they wouldn't have been there, but I don't recall seeing any members of Perk at Kirkcaldy Police Station in that morning, but that's not to say they weren't there, but I don't recall seeing them.
Right, thank you. Can we look, sorry, to go back to the bottom, just the line above number 3, the last line on the page. It says families seem to have disengaged with police. What was the position by this stage? So this is 12:30 on the day after, the Monday, the 4th of May.
So we'd had the meeting at 8:15 or whenever the Gold Group was the previous night. Keith and I had the discussion, and I later learned, I didn't know at that point, but I later learned that he had, as I understand it, phoned and perhaps went to meet the family on the evening. I only know that through statements, to be honest with you. I didn't know that at the time. But then when I was at the Gold meeting, the family had disengaged. I'm not convinced that was specifically or only the police. I think it may have been Perk as well, but I'm not sure on that. And well, the reasons behind that will, I've no doubt, have been explained by other family members.
Right, thank you. Item 3 is the investigative process. This time it's spoken to by DI Stuart Wilson, who you've mentioned was from MIT.
Yep.
Or MIT. It says at the top of the next page, locust protection is still ongoing. So there's a general update on what the investigation are doing at that stage. Would you say then it was MIT or MIT that were involved in progressing the investigation?
Yeah, they would be progressing on behalf of Perk, who had responsibility for the investigation.
Right. Can I ask you to look at, we'll see it just at the bottom of the page, there's a task, advice to be gained from Perk regarding the disclosure of the post-mortem results to the officers involved in the incident. Supervisor to be identified to carry this disclosure out. Do you remember that discussion, or a discussion around that task?
Well, so that would suggest to me that Perk weren't at that meeting. The fact that we're asking for advice to be gained from Perk that around that. So I suppose that answers the earlier question. I think it's right that, you know, we, Police Scotland, would need to ask for the Perk's view on that because they're leading the investigation.
Who was it that raised this issue about disclosure of the post-mortem results?
I'm assuming it will be part of who was doing that update. Was that?
It was Wilson.
Yeah. So
D.I. Stuart Wilson from MIT.
So I'm assuming it was probably. I don't know who initiated the task, to be honest with you, but I'm assuming it's on the back of the update given by Stuart Wilson, D.I. Wilson.
Thinking back now to this meeting, do you remember why they wanted to disclose the PM results to the officers involved in the incident?
Well, from my perspective, it would be why would we not? It's back to that. Why would we not tell the officers they have been involved in a harrowing, tragic incident, and they, this is now 36 hours later. If we, as an organisation, knew what the likely cause of death was, or the initial synopsis of that, why would we not tell the officers?
Were you aware, we'll come on to statements later in more detail, but were you aware at this time that none of the officers had provided operational statements?
Yeah, I probably was. I'm getting mixed up with timings, but yeah, I'm pretty sure I will have been. Yeah.
And so, in the absence of their own statements, was it discussed that maybe advising them about the results of post-mortem was unwise or shouldn't be done?
No, I don't know if you have the post-mortem summary, but from memory it was literally a sentence long, so there wasn't a lot of information there that would, in my view, have impacted or affected any statement they would have provided. I was aware, I don't know if it was at this point or if it's in the following days, but I was aware of the advice that officers were getting from their federation advisors not to give statements. So, that could, and I think did, go on for a long period of time. So, why would you not tell the officers and give them that form of words, that very short summary?
Was it, you've said why would you not, was it normal practice for officers involved in an incident to be advised about the post-mortem results?
Yes, in my sort of final years in policing, part of my remit was in charge of custody, and there are sadly a number of deaths in custody, every year, and the cause of death, if it's known, and there is nothing to suggest that there is any criminality then why would you not tell the witnesses? Why would you not tell the witnesses what the cause of death was?
And in the absence of statements from the officers who attended the incident, who were the main eyewitnesses to the incident, how can a decision be taken or a view formed as to whether or not there is criminality?
From the post-mortem would be one significant piece of evidence from other eyewitnesses that had maybe given statements by then, would be critical forensics. You know, it would be helpful to have the officers' statements, but you know, the officers not giving their statements, as I understood it, was on the advice of their federation reps. I'm sure you've had all the officers in here, and they'll give their own personal view on why they did or did not. But certainly, the feedback I was getting at the time, not from the officers, but from others at the time, it was the advice and the direction from the federation reps that they were not to give a statement. It wasn't because the officers were feeling as though they may incriminate themselves.
We've heard a lot of evidence from different officers, and I would probably be doing them a disservice to summarise. But I think certainly at that time, I've asked a lot of witnesses about whether they thought they were witnesses or suspects. And there may have been a view that if they were suspects of potential criminality, they would not be they would want to reserve the right of privilege to avoid incriminating themselves. They were not satisfied that they were going to just be witnesses. So there was a concern, and the advice they received at that time was not to give operational statements. And they didn't give those until the 4th of June.
Right.
So there were obviously concerns, legitimate or otherwise, that they were perhaps going to become suspects. So there was a question about whether there would be criminality alleged. And I'm just trying to understand, the officers themselves involved had that concern in their minds, or possibly had that concern in their minds and didn't give statements. But there seems to have been a view, from what you've been saying today, that you would happily, you wouldn't have any concerns about disclosing the post-mortem results because there was no suggestion of criminality. I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm being absolutely honest, it was not my decision. Ultimately, it's the askers of the park there. But if there is no criminality, then for me, or there is no criminality apparent at that point, for me, the welfare of the police officers is very important. And you know, they have been involved in this tragic death the day before, and of course they'll be worried. There is absolutely no doubt of that. So, you know, if the initial cause of death is known, why would we not disclose it to the officers? And that would be for Park to make that decision, but why would we not?
Was there an assumption or a belief at this stage that there wasn't criminality on the part of the officers?
There's not there was, well, again, I'm not part of the investigation, but you know, these officers at this point were witnesses to this tragic death. That's, you know, there was nothing else being suggested at that point that I was aware of.
And the investigation's at an early stage. It's ongoing. Campbell's the SIO.
Yep.
You talked yesterday about hypotheses, and one of those being that it could have been, the underlying motivation could have been some sort of racial discrimination. You've not been able to rule out that hypothesis because you don't have any statements from the officers. And I'm just wondering, against that background, where it's at an early stage, there's various hypotheses which are considering, if nothing more, that there could be criminality, but there seems to be a view in Police Scotland, at least, that no issue with disclosing PM results. Was any of that raised or discussed or considered at the Gold Group meeting?
I can't exactly recall. I'm sure I'm pretty certain it was, and that's probably where it got to the bottom line there, which is advice to be gained from PIRC around the disclosure. You know, a direction. You know, the decision has to be made, and you know, hindsight's great on if it's the right or wrong decision, but a decision needed to be made. You know, for me, if the cause of death, which I've not seen in a long period of time, suggested criminality, then that would put a different perspective on it, but from memory it didn't. So on that basis, back to the question that I asked yesterday around Colette Bell, why would you not give the officers, their welfare needs to be a key factor in this.
And what would you have expected from the post-mortem if it had, if it was going to raise issues of criminality? What would you have thought?
I mean, there could be. I'm speaking very generally. I mean, there could be, you know, 100 different things that could come forward on a post-mortem that could infer criminality. Genuinely, you know, there's various different ways that could manifest itself.
And in relation to an incident where there's been police contact, what can you give us an example of what you might have expected?
I actually can't think of any specific incidences, but you know, I spoke about the incident down south yesterday briefly around a police contact or a police shooting and the individual died, so that could be a scenario. That there could be, you know, a police vehicle could hit someone, that could be a scenario.
So where there's a death and there's police contact, it could be criminality or it could be a justified use of force.
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
And so if there's a restraint and someone dies, that could equally be a justified use of force, or it could be criminality.
Yeah, it could, yeah.
Looking at that task, it says advice to be gained from PERC about disclosure, but then it says supervisor to be identified to carry this disclosure out. I mean, that sounds like a disclosure will be carried out and we need to appoint a supervisor to do that. So it sounds like, on the one hand, let's get advice from PERC, but on the other, there's going to be a disclosure.
No, I wouldn't read it like that, actually. I would read it as we need to get a decision from PIRC, and you know, we need to identify on the basis that PIRC may agree and may decide yes, we need to identify the right supervisor, because again, you know, this has to be done very, very sensitively with these police officers. It's not a matter of, you know, just plucking somebody out the air who maybe has no rapport, no understanding of the incident. You know, you need somebody who's got the skill set, because despite the PM, the initial PM, as I would say, not inferring criminality, you know, it's still a very big thing for these police officers to hear. So it's about identifying the right person, I suppose, I would put in there to carry out the disclosure if indeed it's approved.
Do you remember who was appointed?
I don't actually, and I probably should know that, but I don't.
All right. Could you give me a moment, please?
Yeah, of course.
I'm conscious of the time.
We'll take a 20-minute break. Ms. Graham.
Thank you. We were talking about the events surrounding the post-mortem.
Yep.
And we've heard evidence that took place on the 4th of May, the Monday after. And we've looked at the minutes from the Gold Group meeting. They were PS 03161, where we were talking about what the officers were being advised. This was at 12:30 on the 4th of May. Let's just look at that section again. It's down towards the bottom of the page, I think. No, it's in the middle of page 2. Sorry about that. Yeah, the task there, that you were seeking advice from PERC, and a supervisor would be appointed or identified to carry out the disclosure. We've heard evidence from Conrad Trickett to the inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to ask you about what he said to see if you had any awareness of this. It was he gave evidence on day 46, which was the 8th of March this year. He said that he understood the legal advice was not provide a statement. This was the advice to the officers who'd attended, because they couldn't confirm what their status was. We won't be able to confirm your status until the cause of death is known. That was his understanding of the advice that was being given. Hence the importance of the cause of death in relation to, from a post-incident point of view, that would be a trigger, and for the legal advice and the officers there to provide a statement. So he understood, as I understand his evidence, that once they had that information about cause of death, that would be, as he put it, a trigger for the officers then to clarify their status and provide statements to the inquiry. I wonder if during that Gold Group meeting that we've been looking at the minutes of, so this is on the 4th of May, 12:30, there was any discussion around that the officers were waiting to hear about cause of death before they'd be prepared to give statements?
I certainly don't recall it, and I would hope if there was that there would be something in the minute of that, because that's a pretty important discussion to have, but I can't recall.
So,
now.
In the absence of anything like that in the minute, do you remember yourself being aware of a sort of quid pro quo, tell us the cause of death and we'll give you a statement arrangement?
No, I don't remember that.
No. Is that the sort of information you would have wanted to have been made aware of in your role as Silver Commander?
Not necessarily, and of course, it's almost it's a meaningless agreement. And what I mean by that is that position could change, the next hour. There's no formal commitment there, as I understand it, as you described to me. So it's no really relevant. But I had certainly never heard that was anyway a sort of a quid pro quo. No.
Did you think it was of any interest that the officers were taking that position, that they didn't want to give statements?
My understanding, as I said earlier, was that this was the advice coming from the Federation and the Federation lawyers. And I'm not surprised that the officers took that position, bearing in mind they were getting that legal advice from Federation and their lawyers.
We've heard evidence from the doctor pathologist who carried out the post-mortem, and her name was Shearer. She explained to us that initially her report said the cause of death was unascertained, pending toxicology.
Okay.
Were you aware of that?
I wasn't actually. I thought the one I read was a bit more detailed than that.
Right. I'm not suggesting that it wasn't detailed, having carried out the post-mortem, but the cause of death was listed as unascertained initially.
Right.
Pending the toxicology investigations. That was dated, that report was dated the 6th of May, so a couple of days after the post-mortem itself was done. and it says unascertained pending investigations. And she explained that those investigations were toxicology investigations and things along those lines. It wasn't until the 18th of June 2015 that a final post-mortem report was actually signed by her and her colleague. So initially, at least on the 4th of May, on the 5th of May, as far as the official report was concerned, cause of death was unascertained.
Yeah, that's the first I've heard that, to be honest with you. I'm surprised at it, because I'm pretty certain, and I would have to revert to my statement, I'm pretty certain we had, there was a cause of death, an initial cause of death past either the 5th or the 6th of May. And yeah, so that was my understanding. Now, I don't know where that came from, whether it was from that lady's final or initial or finding report, or the officers or the park staff or whoever was at the post-mortem. I couldn't even tell you who was there. I assume it was park staff. So I'm surprised at that.
Unascertained wouldn't rule out any criminality at that stage, would it? Would you agree
No,
with that?
I would agree, yeah.
I think that we also heard from Trickett, Conrad Trickett, the post-incident manager, that he was then told on the 5th of May, so that's the Tuesday, the day after the post-mortem is carried out. He has a conversation on the phone that morning, and he said that officers had been advised last night, so on Monday night, the 4th of May, pending toxicology, the cause of death did not result from blunt force trauma. So there seems to have been at least some understanding that at that stage, whatever the cause of death, it wasn't blunt force trauma.
Yeah, that was my understanding.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you remember why there was so much interest in ruling out blunt force trauma?
Not specifically. No, I mean that was the cause of death that was passed that I got sight of. You know, I assumed that came from the pathologist, but I think you're suggesting that it didn't come from the pathologist.
Well, I don't want to make any suggestions to you, but certainly the post-mortem had been carried out on the 4th. Blunt force trauma had been ruled out by the pathologist, and that seems to have been shared with the officers on the Monday evening.
So that was my understanding, yeah.
We've heard evidence that one of the officers had struck Mr. Bio. He gave evidence to this effect, that he struck Mr. Bio on the head a number of times with his baton. And we've also heard evidence from other officers that the officer who did this was quite upset when he went back to Kirkcaldy Police Office. I wondered if that was a situation that you were aware of, that there had been concern that he had contributed in some way to the death? At least at that stage.
Yeah, I'm trying to, because I did watch at least one of those interviews on here, so I'm trying to deconflict what I knew a few months ago to what I knew 8 years ago. So I'm not entirely clear, to be honest with you.
Can I ask you, so you were not part of any discussion about all of the ramifications to do with the pathology results, the post-mortem results?
No, that wasn't my role. So I was not, any discussions that were happening between Park and police, that most likely happened. I'm totally assuming probably between Park and the detective super.
And in terms of welfare issues, if an officer was very concerned and worried about what the impact was of actions he'd taken, was that something that you would have expected to know about?
Well, that was the purpose that was one of the purposes for Conrad Trickett to be there. That was his main role, was around the welfare of the officers. So I would certainly expect him to be cited on that. Any sort of anecdotal comments. You know, Conrad wouldn't come running to me and say, this is what an officer A said 10 minutes ago, and you know, that's not how we would be operating. We've all got our distinct roles, and yeah, so I would expect Conrad to know that.
Right. So if an officer has said he struck the subject over the head with a bat and he was concerned about that and upset about that, from a welfare perspective, you wouldn't have expected that to be brought to your attention?
There is a possibility that would come to my attention. I don't remember it distinctly, but yeah, there is the possibility. I mean, that's quite a serious or important point. I suppose the point is, though, is that it's the provenance of that. You know, where is that coming third hand? I don't know. You know, where is that coming from? Is it coming from the officer directly? Did he mention it directly to Conrad? Did it go up the tree in that way? I don't know.
Can I ask you about the timing of the statements? Did you have any concerns from what you knew at the time that the officers had declined to provide statements on the basis of advice that they'd received?
Did I have concerns about it?
Did you have concerns about that? How that might impact on the investigation, for example?
I genuinely, there weren't concerns. It was the reality of the fact, which was that they had been given legal and or independent federation advice not to give statements. That there is nothing that me or anyone else could do in that circumstance to make them, you know, that wasn't my role. So it was a matter of fact, and it was something that, for me, we just have to move on from.
We've heard a lot of evidence that this is a situation where people haven't come across it before, where officers have been involved in an incident and declined to provide operational statements. Would that accord with your experience?
Because I was in charge of custody, and you know, I would imagine there's probably 6 or 7. It's probably a slight exaggeration. Maybe 3 or 4 deaths in custody in a year in Scotland, and I would have oversight of them. Then I am aware since 2015 of that having happened since, but not for such a prolonged period of time. And again, my view on it is that it's it's about the best evidence, not the quickest evidence, is the phrase that I always use. It's, you know, if officers need a period of time to properly formulate in their head exactly what happened and to document that on paper, then give them the time and the space to do that. Let's not rush them into that position, because actually what we want to get is the facts and the most coherent and comprehensive response. So I am aware of occasions where there has been delays in police officers or police staff giving statements, and I've accepted that as the commander of Criminal Justice Services Division to say, well, let's just give them a bit of space to do it.
When you're talking about a bit of space, what sort of timescale?
Genuinely, I wouldn't put a time on it. I mean, if it went on to weeks and weeks, I'd be asking serious questions. But these are traumatic incidents. You know, people taking this incident to one side, but you know, police officers are present or find very vulnerable people dead in police cells in a condition that, you know, probably very few in this room have ever witnessed. So you need to give police officers, they're just human beings like the rest of us, you need to give them a bit of time to fully absorb and come to terms with what they've faced. And then, you know, and some deal with it different and quicker and slower than others, so it's about giving them the time and space, because it's the best evidence, not the fastest evidence, that's important.
Yesterday we talked about conferral, and you talked about the risks of people starting to discuss an incident, and that discussion, finding out what other people recollect can have an impact on their recollection. Is that something that was concerning you in relation to the absence of statements here?
It wasn't concerning because the reality is we were where we were, and what I mean by that is they had been given legal advice not to give a statement. So, you know, whether it was concerning to me or not didn't actually matter. The fact of the matter was that that was the position they were taking, so we just need to move on from that.
Did you take the view that you didn't have any leverage at all to try and persuade the officers or encourage them to give statements?
I certainly wasn't going to encourage them. I mean, you know, the Federation and legal representation is there for a reason, and I think we have to respect that. As you know, a public inquiry is a perfect scenario of that. We need to follow proper and due legal process, so that I was allowing them to do that.
Can I ask you something that's been suggested by someone from Perk? Now, we've not heard evidence from this gentleman. His name's McSporran. Police Scott, this is what he says. I'd just like to ask you what you think of this suggestion. Police Scotland could have instructed or ordered the 9 officers, that's the 9 attending officers, to provide a statement on the grounds that it is within their standards of professional behaviour, i.e. constables give and carry out only lawful orders and instructions. Failure to obey a lawful order may constitute misconduct under the Police Service of Scotland Conduct Regulations 2014. Can I ask you what you think of that suggestion? That there could have been an order or an instruction given?
So I've not looked at the regulations, and you know, I'm pretty distant from those sort of regulations just now, but I think that would have been wholly inappropriate to do that. These, you know, what could you potentially have got from the officers there is maybe a single sentence, you know, I commence duty at such and such. That's all I recall. You could have, you know, if you begin to force officers to do it when they have legal advice to say not to do it, I think that's not the best approach to take, and that's not the approach I would take anyway.
We've heard some evidence that operational statements can be very brief. They don't need to give a lot of detail about the events, but they can certainly pin down when the duty commenced and an outline, if no more. You didn't think it was appropriate to seek that from the officers?
It's back to, you know, I feel as though I'm repeating myself, but, you know, you ask the officers to give statements, they are refusing on the basis of their legal advice not to give a statement at that point, then for me you have to respect that decision.
Right. So in terms of you and the Gold Group, once the officers received the advice they received and took the view they wouldn't provide statements, no further steps were taken or suggested by the Gold Group in relation to obtaining those statements?
Certainly not that I was involved in or can recall that.
Slightly gone on to statements, I want to just come back and complete something about the post-mortem.
Okay.
So officers were told on the evening of the 4th of May, as we understand the evidence from, for example, Conrad Trickett, which was the evening of the day that the post-mortem took place. And were you advised that that was going to be done, or were you advised retrospectively that it had been done?
I can't remember. I was certainly advised. I don't know if it was before or after. It may be in my statement. I just can't quite remember.
Right. We've also heard evidence from the family that they didn't hear that the post-mortem had taken place. Arrangements weren't made to take them to attend prior to the post-mortem. They didn't find out the post-mortem had taken place until the Tuesday, which was the 5th of May.
Okay.
And that was during or after a meeting with their lawyer. And I wonder if you have concerns. You've talked about how the family were a priority and concerns about tensions, potential tensions in the community. Do you have, looking back at that time time frame, do you have concerns about the fact that the officers were told on the Monday night after the post-mortem had been carried out, but the family weren't told until the Tuesday?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Can you explain to the chair what your concerns are?
Well, the family of someone who's died following police contact there's been a post-mortem carried out on their body, and they've been oblivious to, one, that fact, and two, the results of that post-mortem. That's wrong.
If you'd been in charge of that situation, you've explained the PERC taking over the investigation, but if you'd been in charge of that situation, how would you have handled it?
You know, and I don't want to get into it's difficult, because looking back, the hindsight brigade, it's easy to say I would have done it differently, I would have done it better, but, my experience of having been involved in deaths and having, been a senior investigating officer is the results of the post-mortem, either the first or one of the first group of people that you tell is the family. And even more so nowadays, where, social media, things can leak very, very quickly. So out of respect and dignity for the family, they need to be at the top of your list for informing of the result, in my view.
So can I take it from that you would have told the family first?
I certainly, and yes, yep.
Can I ask you some questions about the impact of telling officers first, where cause of death is unascertained? And drawing on what you said yesterday about when people start talking about things that can influence or change their own recollection. We've heard some evidence that an officer prepared a statement initially very soon after the events and said nothing in that about hearing about a rib fracture. We've heard from the pathologist about subsequent investigations that did discover a rib fracture. And we've also heard evidence that at a later statement that was given, after the pathologist had discovered the rib fracture, that there was mention of the officer having heard the rib fracture. You following what I'm saying? So a difference, an apparent difference between two statements.
Right, okay.
In between those dates, the pathologist has identified that there was a rib fracture. Is that the type of thing that can happen when, I'm not asking you to explain that apparent difference, but is that the type of thing that could happen if information is given to an officer in relation to pathology, that statements will change?
It could happen, yeah, of course it could happen. I felt the cause of death that I seen was so brief and succinct that I've explained that I think it was the right thing to do. But yes, that scenario as you play out could happen.
So it's possible, if additional information comes to the attention of someone, that they can then absorb that and think that's something that they...
Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right. Can I ask you now to look, please, at your original operational statement, PS 03136, please. And this is, if we could look at page 3 now, please. And it's paragraph 5 that I'm interested in. And you say that About 7 a.m. on Monday, the 4th of May, I commenced duty at Kirkcaldy Police Station, so this is the day after.
Yeah.
Later that day, and you say 15:45 hours, accompanied with Superintendent Milton, I again attended and spoke to Addy and Caddy. So you went back to the Johnsons the day after. This is after the Gold Group meeting that we
Yes.
looked at a moment ago.
Yep.
And you went back to where they lived to speak to them.
Yeah.
And it says a number of other family members and friends were present. My primary concerns at this time remained the immediate family of Sheku and local community tensions, which were beginning to grow predominantly via social media. Family and local community reassurance was vital throughout this period, and my focus remained on this aspect whilst the PERC continued their investigations. On arrival, the family were pleased to see me and articulated a dissatisfaction with PERC involvement to date, stating that they had had little contact and not received any further information. They requested that they be afforded the opportunity to lay flowers on Hayfield Road, and that an explanation as to why they, PERC, still had control of the house and why access to the deceased's home address had been prevented by PERC the previous evening. I reiterated my role and advised that I would pass on their queries to PERC. Can I ask you just a little bit about this visit? Do you remember going back to speak to Addy and Caddy that afternoon?
I do. Yeah.
And so that was at 3:45 on the Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah. And tell us about that visit. How were the family with you that day?
So I felt, and as outlined there, I do feel that the family were pleased to see me. They were clearly still very, very distraught and emotional. I learned at that point that they'd had a conversation with PERC. It did not come across as being the most positive of conversations. And then we spoke around, I explained, or reiterated most likely that PERC, had a job to do, and that was their responsibility. But, I am here as the commander, what support can I give you that's not, crossing across their boundaries, if you like. And then that's when they came and mentioned the flowers, and I can't remember the ins and outs of it, but, they were, from recollection, the family were simply wanting to attend at the place where Sheku had fallen unconscious at the point of police contact or thereabouts, and which wasn't far from their house from memory, and to, in a sort of dignified way, leave some flowers and pray or whatever it is that they wanted to do and mark the respect for that place where Sheik lay. So, and they'd asked for that to be facilitated, and it hadn't happened. So I said, well, leave that with me and we'll make that happen.
Who had they asked to facilitate that?
You would have to ask Caddy or Addy and other family members. I genuinely don't remember. It will have been either PERC or I don't know, maybe one of the detective constables, but I can't remember.
And what did you do, knowing about this issue with the family?
So
what steps did you take?
So and it's interesting just to go back a little bit. So the reason that I took Superintendent Milton with me was the same purpose that I took Nicola Shepherd the day before. So I would lead on the discussions, and Dougie would be there and maybe not take notes at the time, but would have an independent view to ensure. And Dougie, I think from memory, took a couple of notes around what it was the family would want us to do. And then we left and we made those arrangements for that to happen. I genuinely can't remember if I phoned the PERC or if Dougie, when I was driving, phoned the PERC. It was the minute we pretty much left the house. I says, this needs to get done. So we just arranged for that to happen.
If you'd been leading the investigation at that time or involved in taking control of matters, what would you have done to assist the family in this regard?
you know, I would have that I would have made that happen very quickly, and I would have arranged for it to have been done in at a time, in a way, in a fashion that would suit the family, because it's a really important point for me. You know, it's my family. You really want that to happen in a very dignified and in a way that suited the family.
Can you tell the Chair, are there any reasons why that can't be done quickly?
So I don't know at what point the locus protection, the crime scene management work was ongoing, and I did explain that to the family because I was unsighted, but I think from memory they were even happy to go to a point as close to the site where Sheku fell unconscious, so it didn't actually need to be right at that. They were not flexible, but they were happy to work within. They understood the importance of the crime scene and the examination of that, so they were happy to work around that.
If it had been you organising it, would you have arranged an escort of some kind to take them?
If they wanted that, because they may not have wanted that, because from memory I think they were going to walk down because it wasn't particularly far. But yeah, anything that they had asked for, then I would have tried to facilitate it.
You talk there about local community tensions were beginning to grow, predominantly via social media. How were you aware of that?
So I was on social media, so I may have picked up pieces in that. There was most likely the role of media in the gold groups. That would be one of the ladies' roles, would be to brief the gold on any significant media and that includes social media interest. So if there was anything that was beginning to, because it can go a number of different ways, that can it? It could be that there's a hatred towards the police could emerge. It could be a hatred towards the family. It could be, who knows what could happen in social media. So it's important, again, as police officer in the gold group, we would be cited on anything that was particularly nasty or insightful or dangerous.
So from your role at that time, it was important that you were able to identify tensions as they were growing, if they did grow, and what area they might be in.
Yeah.
Was there, apart from yourself being on social media, was there also monitoring of social media?
Sorry, the media. So in the gold group, I think was her name Kate, but the media lady, that would be one of their roles, would be to monitor social media and to bring any pertinent posts or whatever to the gold group if it was deemed appropriate.
And can I presume that the monitoring of social media is in relation to publicly available information on the internet?
Yes, yeah.
Was there monitoring of the Justice for Sheku bio page that was set up?
I don't know. There may have, if it was a public site, media would tell you they may well have done that. I don't know when that was actually established, if it was established by that time or not.
Can I ask you something about what's on the next paragraph? If we look to the bottom of this page, the statement, the family raised the issue of an article published in the Dundee Courier that morning regarding Sheku's death. They were unhappy that I was quoted therein. I advised that I was simply expressing my sincere condolences to the family and that I had no control over what the media printed. I informed them that it was unlikely that I would release further statements to the press as the inquiry rested with the PERC, but that if it was necessary, out of courtesy, I would have advised them prior to doing so. So it would appear this is another topic the family raised with you at that meeting, 15:45 that afternoon. Can you, if we can maybe see the sort of the whole paragraph on the screen, if possible. You say they were unhappy that you were quoted. Do you remember?
I do.
This
yeah.
conversation. Can you tell us a little more about
so
that?
the night before whatever, it was at the back of 6, 7 o'clock when I'd been in the house, because Sheku's mum was to travel up, they were wanting to be the ones that notified her directly, understandably so. The media release that was put out from memory, and I'm sure you have it, I've not seen it since then, was a more general, there has been a death has occurred, the police and/or Park are investigating it, and it was to provide reassurance to the wider community, because this is back to that community reassurance, community tension, community concern. The public, when they read that a male has died, they're concerned. So we need to, as I was then the police commander, we need to put some reassurance out, because it's important for the wider community. But I did apologise in that, I didn't think the article that went out would have in any way alerted Sheku's mum to the circumstances. But then I did, as it says at the end there, pledge that if there were any other media releases to go out, I would share it with them in advance. And I've done that. That's not an unusual, that's within reason quite normal, because you want to, that's what flows would probably do, is in various inquiries would be dependent on the circumstances, where we're about to appeal for witnesses, or we're about to do this or that, and you would share that with family in advance, so they're not taken by surprise.
So looking back now, in an ideal situation, there would have been a flow, liaising with the family or appointed to the family, who could update them in relation to media statements that would be being released.
Sorry, yeah, that would be certainly one of their key roles, of course, yeah.
And is that really the ideal situation, rather than expecting someone in your role to advise the family?
Exactly.
Right. And you've said there, out of a courtesy, you would advise them prior to doing so in the future. Is that a practice that you've adopted since?
Yes, to be honest with you, and probably prior to this, depending upon the inquiry, then I would, out of I think my beliefs around the family being a central tenet to any investigation. So I think that's a good practice to adopt.
And with hindsight, if they'd known about that in advance, do you think that would have helped the relationship between the family and Police Scotland, or even with the investigation generally being led by Perk?
I don't know. It certainly couldn't have done any harm. I mean, I did apologise to them at the time, and I do genuinely feel they accepted that. That first media article that went out was done very early on. It was probably written pre the meeting the meeting with the family the day before, and it was pretty general, but it could have been done better.
You've said there that it was published in the Dundee Courier, and you said that you have no control over what the media printed. Can I ask you about that? How did it come about that the Dundee Courier had a quotation from you? So basically, again, media would be the ones that would tell you this, but what happens when there is a flurry of police activity on Hayfield Road, as it was here, where you've got various police officers and police staff guarding various loci, 5 different addresses. The media hear about that sort of thing really quickly, not from the police, but from members of the public, or they might, the local media might drive past, and so they would then phone, a lot of likelihood is they would phone the Police Scotland media department and say, what's happening in Kirkcaldy? There seems to be a lot of police activity. The short quote that I gave was about it was a reassurance piece, and that would have been what media gave to what Police Scotland will have probably circulated to media outlets. So can I understand, any contact you have with the media is through the media department of Police
Yes,
Scotland.
by that time, yes.
And was this statement or quote given to the media department prior to PERC taking over the lead of the investigation?
Not sure about the timings. Again, media would be able to tell you that unless you have the media statement to hand, but I can't recall the exact timings.
If PERC had taken over the investigation by this stage and had had a handover from the police, in that scenario, would Police Scotland customarily be issuing media statements, or would you be handing that responsibility over to PERC?
So I suppose it's down to everybody's. There's probably not any clear, definitive answer to that. My view was, or is, that at least the initial messaging should go out from the commander of that area. In 2015, very, very few people, I suspect, really knew and understood what PERC were there to do and their roles and responsibilities. So, you know, bearing in mind, as I say, there's significant policing presences at various addresses, including Hayfield Road. I think the commander of that area is probably best placed to provide a bit of visible communication that hopefully provides a bit of reassurance to the local communities.
Just in light of what you said, on the day that this happened, did you yourself have a clear idea of what the remit of PERC was, or what they were going to do?
I knew that the PERC were taking responsibility for the lead. They were the lead in this investigation. I personally had, I don't know how new the PERC were by that time, maybe only a year old or 18 months or something. So I'd had some involvement with the PERC before, but not a huge amount because we're a really young organisation. But yeah, my understanding was they were going to take, they're there to take oversight and lead on this investigation and this inquiry.
And what was the extent of that investigation at the time, as far as you understood?
So there was agreed parameters that were set in place, but I'd have to see them to refresh my memory. But you know, it was about the investigation and probably the precursor, the lead up to that investigation. It does stick in my mind that was expanded a little in the days following the death of Sheku, following police contact. It was expanded, but I couldn't tell you exactly to what degree.
Although you can't tell us today, at the time, is your recollection that you had a clear impression of the scope of or the limitations on the investigation?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah.
And where did that come from?
Probably from Pat Campbell and or Keith Harrower and or Gold.
Thank you. If we can move away from this meeting that you had with the family, which was the 4th of May, there at 3:45, I'd like to look at an agenda for a further Gold Group meeting on the 6th of May. Oh, well, actually, before I move on to that, can I look at PS 01336? And this is a critical incident communications strategy document. If we can move away from this to PS 01336. Yes. So as we see that, the author is Lucy Adamson. It's created on the 4th of May 2015, and it's headed up Critical Incident Communications Strategy, Operation Burnley. You talked about declaring a critical incident yesterday in your evidence.
Yeah.
And this is a document that's been prepared by Lucy Adamson. Do you know who Lucy Adamson was?
So she was, I'm not sure her formal title, but she was Director or Head of Corporate Communications for Police Scotland.
And the purpose is given at number 1, to outline a communication strategy that supports the objectives of the Gold Strategy following the death of Sheku Bayo in Kirkcaldy on Sunday the 3rd of May. This document will be regularly assessed and refreshed to ensure it continues to meet the needs of the Gold Strategy. Did you have any involvement in the preparation of this? Or?
No.
No, it wasn't you. Well, you may not be able to assist me with this, but can I ask you to look at number 8, which is on page 3. And this relates to the family. And it's entitled Risks. And it says there are a number of risks identified that will be regularly reviewed to assess their impact on our communications approach. And bullet point 1, the role of the extended family and any subsequent representatives will have a key impact on external comment, and as our media comment is currently limited, effective engagement with the family and their interested representatives will be key. And I know you've spoken a lot about the family being a priority, and I'm wondering if you can help me understand, why are the family and the role of the extended family being listed under risks?
I'm not sure, actually. No, I don't know.
No.
No.
And if we go into the next page, page 4, the third bullet point says early comment on social media channels has already referred to police brutality, and there are many worldwide examples of the impact this has had on community or police relations. There will be a role for PERC in providing reassurance around the investigation and through continued measured visibility of local engagement and reassurance. Is that a recognition really of what you were talking about yesterday when you gave evidence?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was something known to you. And were you aware that on social media channels there were references to police brutality?
I can't recall exactly, but that was the sort of thing that I was touching on earlier in my statement, where I was aware that there was certainly stuff ongoing in social media.
Right. And then there's the next bullet point talks about there may also be impacts on hate crime and regular monitoring of communications channels through for measuring public sentiment and gathering intelligence on future activity which may impact on community relations will be key. I'm interested in the phrase regular monitoring of communications channels. What was that about? Do you know?
No, I'm guessing. No, I don't know exactly. It probably is another way to describe social media, national media, written press, radio, and just all the different forums of communication.
And you said that monitoring of that type of thing would be through the media department?
Yeah, so that's exactly. So
Yeah.
Lucy's in charge of that, and that would be my expectation, that they would be doing that monitoring. And I think it's a piece of IT equipment or a company that can measure some of that for Police Scotland if they
Is
pay
that
us.
outsourced
Yes.
from Police Scotland?
Yeah.
And then it says gathering intelligence on future activity may impact on community relations. Do you know what that was in reference to, gathering intelligence on future activity?
No.
Right. And then the next bullet point, while there is no evidence to suggest the incident was terrorism related, it may cause concern either amongst other police officers and staff or amongst communities. Were you aware if that was a concern being caused amongst other officers?
No, I wasn't actually. I said that yesterday. There was no suggestion that this was a terrorist-related incident.
Right. And then Miss Adamson has said you're invited to comment on the draft strategy. Was this something you were ever invited to comment on?
I don't recall seeing it, certainly.
Can I ask you to look at your inquiry statement, please? And it's paragraphs 134 and 135. And I think you may have mentioned something about this yesterday, and I just want to clear that up. And it's 134 and 135, please. Thank you. And you talk about the conversations you had with Addie Johnson, practical things that you did, and you talk about there were family members from all across the world who didn't have accommodation. I made sure we would pay for them to stay in hotels locally when family came across from overseas. It was that kind of help which I was keen to provide. And then you've read one of the inquiry statements that expressed the view that perhaps it was more of a cynical exercise on your part. Again, I can only say that I am saddened by that. I tried to do all that I could to involve the family and build a relationship which might be of use to them at a difficult time. I did it in good faith and in recognition of a devastatingly painful loss for the family and an incident which impacted on the local community. Can I ask you to expand on that a little?
I mean, I think that genuinely articulates how I felt. That was, I mean, if Addie felt that I was in some way trying to provide that support as a cynical exercise, I'm really disappointed in that, because that was absolutely not the case. There was never an ulterior motive. It was, you know, a large number of family members were coming from, you know, other parts of the world, and, you know, what I said to one of my inspectors was, you know, if they're looking for accommodation, if they're needing transportation, let's do all we can do to help them, because the immediate family have enough on their plate to be getting on with. So let's just do what we can to help them, and that's genuinely what we, or what, you know, Fife Division at the time tried to do.
Can I move on and ask you some questions about what would have been the Wednesday, the 6th of May, and if we could look at the Gold Group minutes from that date at 1100 hours, which is PS 09779. And again, you'll see this is headed up agenda. There's no details of who was present during this. Some names are given after each item.
Okay.
I'm interested in, if we can go to the bottom of that page, just above the item 3. You'll see in the blue pen it says, question raised regarding contact with Connie Barczyk. Confirmed PERC have been made aware regarding the need for contact. However, no update to confirm this has taken place. Can I ask you what you were aware of? We've heard that Connie was, and I think we spoke about this yesterday when you gave your evidence, that she had had an arrangement, according to Colette Bell, on this Sunday to meet with Mr. Bio. She was the mother of his oldest child. And can you tell me what you knew at this stage about Connie's involvement?
From memory, not a great deal, other than what you reminded me of yesterday. But it does. So what day is this? The Wednesday?
This is the Wednesday after he died.
Yeah, it does sort of reinforce to me that, you know, the priority of family, immediate family, next to kin, you know, if we're now talking 4 days later, was still not where it needed to be, and was still not the priority that myself and others felt it should be.
We've heard evidence from Colette Bell. She understood that Connie found out through Facebook. Does that cause you concerns that someone would find out in that way?
Yes, most definitely.
And in looking at this agenda or minutes, do you, looking back at what happened, would you have handled that differently?
Yeah, I mean, the priority should be the family in these circumstances. Connie is clearly was a you know, a previous partner of Sheku, and they had a a child together. So, you know, for me, she, as with others, need to be a priority, and that is what never happened as quickly as it should have, with the investigation that was being led at that time by the PIRC.
Certainly we've heard evidence from Colette Bell, which indicates that Connie was never approached by the authorities, if I can put it that way. And does that cause you concern?
Absolutely. Yep.
If we stay with this page, just above it's part of item 5. Well, actually, if you can go up the page, sorry, and there's a passage that says, oh no, sorry, if we can go to the bottom of that page, sorry, I was confused there for a moment. Right, at the bottom of that page, item 4, family concerns is spoken to by yourself. And then if we can go on to page 2 at the top, it says extended family is starting to arrive in the Kirkcaldy area, and Police Scotland have accepted the responsibility to locate accommodation and transportation for them. Police Scotland has also confirmed they will cover the costing for these actions. And were these things that you were continuing to be involved in on the Wednesday, even though by that stage PIRC were present and leading the investigation?
Yeah, so this was for me nothing to do with the investigation now. This was just about common decency and working with the family to make arrangements as easy for them as they possibly could. And you know, there was a lot of costs that were coming, and you know, that was the last thing the family needed to be worrying about. So I decided that we were going to pay for certain pieces of accommodation, transportation, etc., and make the arrangements. And you know, I think from memory, it wasn't me, but one of my sergeants or inspector, you know, we got a minibus or a bus of some sort and picked up family members and done, you know, for me, really important things to help them through the early stages.
Thank you. If we continue going down the page, please, within item 5, community issues, there's a reference there. The third paragraph says potential procession or march being organised off on Facebook. Intelligence suggests this is being linked to Connie. Action taken for Barczyk to be spoken to. Could I ask you if you remember that aspect of the meeting?
No, I don't. I remember the march that took place. I don't remember the exact date, but I didn't realise, if that's one and the same, that was organised by Connie, or if that's something different. I'm not sure.
Right. We see beneath that it says discussion to be had regarding the requirement of a protest liaison officer. Can you help us understand what a protest liaison officer is?
I don't know the ins and outs of it. You know, it's again another skill set and that a member of staff can volunteer for, which I suppose probably allows them to understand the implications of a march or a protest by default that the liaison's there to do. I don't know the ins and outs of the roles and responsibilities.
All right, thank you. I'd like to move on to the 14th of May. So this is over a week, less than 2 weeks after the events. And I'd like you to look at paragraph, well, let's look first of all at PS 04984. And this is an email. And as with these threads, it's probably easier to go to the bottom and work our way up. And I'm going to ask you a few questions about this. I'm conscious of the time. Would it be?
We'll stop for lunch and sit at 2 o'clock.
Thank you.